Hello and welcome to A Celtic World, the Celtic show which leans into the fact that there are fans of our great club all over the world. So let's find out as we go round the windows, who are you and where are you from? Let's start with David.
David, I'm in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia.
And hold on, eagle-eyed guests will know that David first joined us when he was talking about Kuala Lumpur CSC. And as a little geography lesson, you're going to realize that some of us are very close to each other. There's Kuala Lumpur, the little red dot. Don't know if you can see that in Malaysia, peninsula of Malaysia. And then on to Robert.
Yeah, I'm Robert. I have spent the last 36 years in Singapore and Hong Kong, but I am in Glasgow this morning.
And Robert, you're here to represent SingTims CSC, so let's show where Singapore is. Very close to Kuala Lumpur, obviously. But as you say, you're in the cold, wet islands of Northern Europe. I don't know if anyone's familiar with those, where that red dot is. Do you notice that Google Earth is throwing in a little bit of politics there? I don't know if you can see that, but
It just says Ireland.
It just says
United
the words
Island.
Glasgow and United and Ireland. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was not by design, I hasten to add. And Paul, where on earth are you?
So yeah, it's Paul in Perth, Western Australia, and you gave me a bit of a hard time because of my lack of some Perth-based history and knowledge. So I did a little. I knew most of this, so you threw me a little bit last week. So I've got some little bits of facts for you about Perth. So founded in 1829 as a colonial place by Captain James Stirling. You asked about the connection to Perth. He was mates with Sir George Murray, who was based in Perth in Scotland. So that's where the name came from. However, obviously, it's got a longer history than that. We had the Aboriginal people, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, have been here in what they call Boorloo for at least 45,000 years. So we're a relatively new city as Perth, but there you go. City of Lights, we've been known as called the City of Lights, because in 1962, John Glenn had a spaceship orbit in the world, and because Perth, as we spoke about last week, is so remote, if everybody turned their lights on, it stood out from space as we go over. So we came to international recognition in 1962 in that, and we had the nickname the City of Lights. So there you go. That's more history than you would expected, I imagine. Plenty more where that came from.
Yeah, and well, I also looked into it a little bit as well, and that Murray is the same guy who gives his name to the Murray River and that whole wine region.
Right.
So he is indeed from Perth. Okay, great. Well, we're going to be delving deep with Robert into the whole SingTims thing in a little while. But before we do, let's do a little bit of housekeeping for the viewer. We've only just begun this channel. So the sooner you subscribe, the more important you are to the amazing success story that we're destined to become. You know, some channels have 41,000 subs. We started this stream with 41. So can I hear 42? How about 43? Maybe we can even breach the big 50 with this video. So watch the number rise as you click subscribe. It's very satisfying when you see it click up another number. And of course, you don't have to take my word for it.
Good morning, Brendan. Can you give us some background as to why you recommended A Celtic World as the YouTube channel you recommended people subscribe to, rather than one of the many others?
Well, I think the important thing about subscribing to A Celtic World is that they won't clog up your notifications with daily clickbait drivel. You know, they focus on the quality. I've always said I'm all about that. So yeah, 2 shows a week, Monday and Thursday, which is much better. Great guys, wonderful human beings, attitude outstanding. Yeah, I certainly would encourage people, if they haven't already, to subscribe right now, in fact. Absolutely.
There you go. What do you think about that, Robert? That's high praise indeed, isn't it?
Absolutely. I expect to see that number going up on the subscribe very fast. That's very
Do
good.
you? Okay, that's good. All right, so let's talk about what we're going to get through today. These are the points on the agenda. Number 1, SingTims, Celtic Supporters Club. Number 2, look at the state of us, where we'll be looking at the state of us. Number 3, we preview the Saints in Paradise, the game against St Johnstone. And number 4, we'll be having a little look at some highlights from the world of Celtic's social media. So let's get to know our guests, particularly Robert, when we go into point number 1, the SingTims CSC. Robert, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background with them and as a Celtic supporter, and I'll bring up some pictures to sort of accompany that at the appropriate times.
Yeah, just a bit of background on how I became a Celtic supporter is maybe a common story. That my dad was Irish, but he settled in the UK after World War II, and we moved to Glasgow in 1964. And I think I didn't know it at the time, but that was probably the most crucial moment in my life, moving to Glasgow just as I was about to start school, and set me on a long journey as a Celtic fanatic. And I went to my first game in 1967, 2 weeks before Lisbon, and we were supposed to win the league that evening, but we lost at home to Dundee United, and had to wait another few days to win what was then set 2 in a row. So I think I went to Hong Kong 36 years ago, and in those days of no internet, no live telly, trying to get news about Celtic was pretty difficult. And Hong Kong was still had a significant British military presence at that time, and they had their own sort of British Forces radio network. And so very often on a Saturday night, because the games were always on a Saturday, then I'd be home at 10 o'clock at night, switch the radio on, trying to pick up commentary and news on the matches. So, I think for younger viewers, maybe can hardly comprehend how difficult it was to, get results and find out information about the matches as it was occurring. And there was always a lag. In Hong Kong, there was a supporters club there, Celtic Supporters Club, and we used to meet every Thursday night, but only if the videotape had arrived in time with the previous weekend's match. And there was a guy, Jerry, who worked for Rolls-Royce, it was his responsibility to make sure that the video arrived. We'd all assemble in a place called the Mariners Club, and good bunch of guys there. I moved to Singapore 2010, and at first I was a little bit lazy. We were getting a lot of live football at that time, Celtic TV, and it took me quite a while to link up with the SingTims. It was just a bit too easy to stay at home on a Sunday night, watch the game on your own or with one of my kids. But I started to get more involved with the SingTims maybe about 4 years ago, and I was just getting into that when COVID came along, and we didn't have any opportunity to meet in our bar to watch matches live. Probably for about 2 years, we had a effective lockdown on watching live sports in pubs until April last year. The Old Firm game, or we don't call it the Old Firm anymore, but the game against Rangers at Ibrox, when Carter Vickers scored the winning goal, and that was us back into weekly viewings. This image here looks like one of our regular pubs. I think the old pub we used to go to, the Hideaway, if I'm not mistaken. Pretty small place, but for a game against Rangers, we could probably get about 50 people in, and
a lot of shirts and evidence.
could hardly breathe. There's a lot of Celtic, there's a lot of SingTim flags. So the club was set up about definitely over 20 years ago by a guy, Harry Murphy.
999.
So 24 years ago, Harry, I think, ran a pub in Singapore at that time, if I'm not mistaken. And every year we produce our own SingTims merchandise, which the members buy, but we also sell to guests and people who are just passing through town. And I think that's the thing about Singapore, is that there's always people passing through. You know, they may be on a short business trip, and they usually manage to track us down. We've just changed pubs in the last 2 or 3 weeks. These are 5 of the stalwarts. Kevin on the left, I think, is now back in the UK. Harry, I mentioned previously, was the founder. Sean Begley is the current sort of maybe leader or chairman of the SingTims. He's a school teacher in Singapore. Jerry Sillers is an absolute stalwart, and we've just lost Grant Logan on the right, who has gone back to live in Aberdeen after quite a lengthy period in Singapore. He's a doctor.
I thought you were going to tell us he was no longer with us. We've just lost him.
No.
I was concerned as well. To be fair, that or Aberdeen, I'm not sure which is worse.
Well, he did send a message saying he managed to get to the game at Pittodrie a couple of weeks ago and, saw a good win. So, he's a doctor. I think his wife's also a doctor, and just left just a few weeks ago. This was a famous night. I was not there, unfortunately. Again, at a different pub. I think this was maybe Bojangles in Singapore. And the story was that I think Rod Stewart was playing a concert. I don't think the concert was actually in Singapore. It might have been in Jakarta, actually. But I think he had a private jet, flew up to Singapore, wanted to know where the Celtic supporters met, came to the pub, and he was just a regular guy. He didn't want a fuss. There's a few people I know who were there, and just he wanted to watch the match. I'm not sure which game it was, and he had a few beers with everybody, had a bit of a sing-song, and a memorable night for everybody who was there. And that's the stalwarts again, the ones that weren't referred to previously. Second from the left is Will Haggerty. He's the one usually responsible for designing and producing the SingTims merchandise every year. And on the far side is his son, Chris, who's a regular. So there's some great guys in SingTims from all sorts of backgrounds, as you would expect from any Celtic supporters club. I was made to feel very welcome when I started attending, and short of going to the game itself, and I'm sure we all have the same experience, that if you can't be at the game, just to be in a bar anywhere in the world surrounded by other Celtic fans is a great way to enjoy the match. And we had some great times in the last season, as we romped away with the league, but with so many games being dramatic last season, a lot of games that we won in the last couple of minutes. So it's just fantastic to be in the pub, irrespective of what the quality of the television screen and how big the screen is. But
it certainly beats waiting for the videotape to arrive a week later.
It beats, turning up on a Thursday night when you already know the score. But, those nights were tremendous as well. But
it's interesting to get to know you guys. We're going to have other SingTims on later, some of the people you mentioned there. Like Jerry, I've spoken to before about coming on the podcast or coming on this show. And he's going to show us his opus and everything. So that'll be fun. Jerry is known to you, David, isn't he?
Jerry's my cousin.
Okay.
It's a small Celtic
and Kevin is one of his best friends is my other cousin back in Greenock. I think Kevin's there, so it's a small world.
Kevin Judge, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think Kevin only left about a year or so, maybe 2 years.
I think about a year ago. I miss him. He's a character. Very.
Yeah. So Jerry was. As I said, we've got a new pub called Muddy Murphy's in Orchard Road in Singapore, and they've given us quite a generous space. There's more than one screen. We get discounts, and I think we're going to have a good time there this season. I understand we had about 40 people for the Ross County game for the opening match. And, the attendances can be up and down, just depending on what time of kickoff it is, what day of the week it is, and, who's traveling and who's got other commitments that night.
Well, look, if you don't have commitments, you've always got someone to go for a beer with in Glasgow, according to that.
I just saw that from
Kaiser.
Jerry was saying he was going to take his Opus down to the new pub, but the Opus weighs about 40 kilograms.
Do we all know what an Opus is?
This was a special production, very high quality book that was made about Celtic. I'm thinking around the maybe Gordon Strachan era, and it was a limited edition, and I kind of bought it one day when I was in Argyle Street in the Celtic shop and got it delivered, and it was so heavy when it arrived in Singapore that I had to pay some sort of customs duties, and they were pretty curious about, because I think all that was written on the outside of the parcel was book, but it was it was incredible weight. So I suggested to Jerry that he shouldn't probably take it to the pub on a Saturday or a Sunday night, as once he's had a few Guinnesses, it might be a bit of a problem for him getting it back home. So it's a fantastic book. It really is extraordinary and very moving. A lot of the stuff that's written about Steen and Jimmy Johnson, Big Billy, are really quite remarkable. So,
well, very good. That's a very interesting insight into being a Celtic fan in Singapore. So, if any of our many listeners are passing through Singapore, they know there's always a little community there to pop in and join in the game, as there is indeed in KL, as David informed us about recently. So we're all over the place. That's good stuff. Paul, you go to Singapore now and then, or were you in Singapore recently?
No, I was in Singapore recently for my honeymoon. It was first trip in a long time, but so I only got been together with the now wife for about 8 years, but we only got married in March, so we did a little honeymoon in the end of July, and good fun. There was only really the friendly with one of the Japanese teams, and I think we had a flash dinner booked that night, so it was I watched the first half in the hotel, and I don't think it would have been too popular if I tried to go to a supporters club while I was on the honeymoon. But
well, it sounds like you would have done that if there'd been a meaningful game.
Well, I brought the laptop, so I might have just watched it in the hotel room, but yeah, one or the other.
Very good.
I've got a very understanding wife. She knew what she was getting married to by the time that happened.
That is very important. So,
look, here we have a comment from a name that I see often on Celtic podcasts, Frank Brennan. There's a real blast from the past, the Opus, and truth be told, had completely forgotten all about it. Well, hopefully we'll do an episode in the future with Jerry, and we'll have a look at it and maybe look at some stills from it and things like that. I know he's had his signed by all sorts of interesting people. So is you bought an Opus? Is that your Opus, Rob?
Yeah, I've got one, but it's in transit just now. I was mentioning to you that I've got a Celtic book collection, which is probably about 300 books, and they're in transit from Singapore to Glasgow just now. I've had a special bookshelf made to accommodate them all, but I just need to be very careful who I allow into that room in Glasgow. I don't want anybody, from the wrong persuasion coming in and getting upset at all these massive green and white in the bookshelf. So, but yeah, I tend to buy books about Celtic, whether I've got time to read them or not. But I just like the history, and there's some really fantastic works that have been written about the club. So,
no doubt. Well, speaking of time, we should probably progress pod and we move on to our next subject. Look at the state of us. I'm still excited by the fact that Frank Brennan has joined us and left a comment. That's when you know you're getting somewhere, where you see people getting involved whose names ring a bell. One of the things that I told myself was a Celtic World's getting somewhere the day that Paddy Lavery shows up, because he's everywhere. This guy from Belfast, from Ardoyne, you see him commenting on all the podcasts. So I look forward to hearing him. There's another comment from Frank Brennan, having praised him, as Richard Burton once said, "Home is where the books are." Evidently, you would go along with that. Okay, so look at the state of us. This is where we're going to discuss where we are, what's going on with Celtic at the moment. Before we start this section, I'd like to discuss how difficult it's been for me this week to see and hear more usages of a certain word than I've heard in the rest of my life. It's driving me crazy. The word's a problem for me, and that word is underwhelming. Underwhelming. Everyone's been saying they're underwhelmed by this transfer window. And my problem is, it isn't really a word, in the etymological sense. Here, let's have a little lesson, shall we? Are you sitting comfortably? Watch our viewing figures decline as I go through this bit. Whelm means to engulf, submerge, or bury, i.e. the bow of the boat was whelmed by a big wave. So overwhelmed then grew in usage as a synonym for whelm. The front of the boat was overwhelmed by a big wave. Underwhelm was invented in the 1950s as a kind of joke term. They just invented it because it sounds like the opposite of overwhelm. But you can't be submerged by something that goes under. Okay, children? So it makes no sense. Of course, nobody cares about all this, except for me. So whatever undiagnosed condition I have that upsets me about this, I want a Celtic word to be a safe space where we don't use that word. So I've got some alternatives, in case you feel the need to say underwhelmed. Any of these will satisfy. So as we go through this conversation, feel free to pick and choose as you will. Okay, so let's start with you, David. You're not underwhelmed. How are you feeling?
I'm fine. I think what the situation that we're in turns on a pinhead. I think we get some signings in before 1st of September, if that's the date. I'm tepid on the names like Louis Palmer. Yeah, can score good set pieces, maybe a bit slow, etc. But I think this happened. I think the next, and I saw before we came on, I don't know how much credence to give to this, but I saw someone said, watch Brendan's news interview or media interview tomorrow. So maybe there's something going to be said. And I also saw that a number of our best players from the last couple of seasons were signed in the last 4 days of our signing window. Again, for me, I'm going to stick with change of manager, loss of important players through transfer, massive. We've got 8 players injured, new guys coming in trying to get up to speed, new way of playing, etc. So I'm still here saying, let's just hang on a couple of weeks, and we will not be we'll be overwhelmed with joy in what we start to see. And I'm looking for. I want to get to the St Johnstone game because they're bottom of the league. We should be able to take care of that easily enough. But it will be very interesting to see how the players react, how the manager reacts to our loss last weekend. So it's exciting.
Exciting.
That's what
Robert,
I'm at.
Are you excited about the reaction to the last game? Robert?
Oh, me. Well, I never judge the players or the team based on what happens at Rugby Park or at Livy. I think these are difficult pitches. We've got a bit of a history of not playing well at those stadiums, except that under Ange, we ran amok at Rugby Park last season. We won 5-0 about 12 months ago, and the second fixture there, we were 4-0 up and missed a penalty by half-time. So Ange didn't have any problems at all with Kilmarnock or Derek McInnes. But I think Brendan, first time round, Neil Lennon, we had some poor results there. The word I will use to describe the first 3 games of the season is maybe a little bit disappointed that the tempo, the fast tempo that was a hallmark of Ange's team for 2 years, we seem to have slowed down quite a bit. We don't get the ball forward fast enough. We go backwards a lot more than we did. But I have faith in Rodgers, and I think he will improve certain players. He will presumably sign another couple of good players, and I think he'll find a system that suits us. And Ibrox might be coming a bit too soon for us, given the number of defenders that are injured. So that worries me. But I think it's still way too early in the season. And if we looked at Rodgers 1, we lost in Gibraltar, we lost in Beersheba. We had some pretty ropey results in the first 6-7 weeks of the season. So I think he's a great coach and a great manager. And frankly, I was delighted to see him come back, albeit massively disappointed that Postecoglou left.
Yeah, it's interesting, I think a lot of the noise that we hear on social media and all that, maybe that's generated by younger folk, and I think older folk, Celtic dads and Celtic granddads, all of which we probably belong to, have a longer term view and realize that things can change very quickly, as David said, and we could be very soon looking back on this season. Do you remember at the start when we were all at sea? And now look where we are. Paul, are you cool with all of that? Or are you, maybe as the least of the Celtic dads among us, are you slightly more interested?
I'm pretty circumspect. I don't far off the other guys. I don't think. I sort of said if we were still playing like this in 2 or 3 months, I'd be there'd be some real concern. At the end of the day, there's a shift. There's a clear shift between what they were being asked to do previously and what they've been asked to do. I quite enjoyed your analysis from Monday, Gav, in terms of, it was very rigid before. Everybody knew their job. It was a well-oiled machine. And it looks like now it isn't. And there's, potentially they say those same players are almost being given too much freedom, and they're almost having to relearn how to play with their teammates, which sounds crazy, but I think there is some method in the madness there. Hopefully, I said, look, I think we did the easy transfer business is done, and then I don't think there'll be a 15 million or 10 or 50 million pound marquee signing that everybody seems to want because there's a ton of cash in the bank, and I think that's a separate story. That it probably is. There is a bit of an issue in terms of the amount we spend. I think we should have been spending 6 to 10 on 2 or 3 players, and the budget's probably there to do that. Now, whether we can attract that, I think I don't think there's too much disagreement that that's where we should be aiming. I think the challenge comes as the transfer market's moved massively since the Saudis have got involved in what they're throwing about and the money that the English Premier League teams can throw around. I think is it City that spent £1 million on a 14-year-old Scottish boy the other week? Like £1 million and he's 14. Like he can't even sign a professional contract for 2 more years, but they paid £1 million somehow to get him on the books. So without making excuses for the board in terms of potential lack of ambition, even if you spend 6 to 10 million, there's no guarantee you get a great player, right? So we spent six, and people make the case, oh, but we spent 6 on CVCV and we spent 6 on Jota, and look how good players we got from that. Well, that's true, but we had them on a try before you buy for a year. So you can equally make the same case about Barkas and Ayeti, where we paid 5 each for them, and they're both turkeys. So I don't think necessarily how much you spend, especially if it's under 10 million, is in this day and age really going to dictate to how good a player it is. But I do think we're probably trying to get bang for buck in that 4 to 10 million range. And I said this before, it's not like you don't just go on Amazon and go, I want a left back in the 6 to 10 million range that definitely wants to come to Glasgow. Boom, we'll collect him. He'll be here next week. Like, it just doesn't work like that. These players that are a bit more established and can walk into the team and immediately benefit us, they've got other options, right? They've definitely got other options. And we've probably got 2 or 3 or 4 options for each of those key positions that we're hopefully we're looking at. And we might not get, I don't think we'll get a first choice, right? There's a pretty good chance we won't get a first choice on that. So you've got to kind of play a bit of a, Russian roulette almost on how long do you wait before, do you hang on for first or second choice, or do you just drop to option 5 and get them in the door and hope that, that's good enough? Or do you play a bit of brinksmanship and go closer to the end of the window and maybe get choice 1, 2, or 3? I think there's a bit of that going on. I do think we've probably had targets that we thought were potentially coming and maybe haven't. I'm hoping that there's stuff going on that isn't the stuff that we're hearing constantly. So we used to be pretty good at not having the signings leaked, and they were pretty much in the door, and maybe you knew it was definitely happening when it was leaked. Like, Lagabilka, we saw the photos at the training ground in the kit before it was officially announced. That's fine. I don't mind that. But there's this constant sort of red top paper talk at the moment of, Fraser and whoever else. And then Rogers comes out and says, well, that's definitely not happening. I don't know if it's that nobody knows what's going on or that stuff is leaking out and then it isn't coming to fruition. I think a lot of the frustration for the support is, 1, it does look clearly disjointed. And 2, as soon as Roger said he wants to make progress in Europe, he's rightly or wrongly, he set an expectation for a lot of the support. And when he said it, I sort of thought, you might have misstepped here, because I saw him, he signed what did he sign? A 3-year deal or whatever he signed. I thought, well, presumably over those 3 years, he's going to hope to make a decent stamp and move us up in Europe, which I don't think that's unrealistic to say. By year 2 and then year 3, we've made significant progress. But everybody took it as, we're going to make significant progress at year 1. Let's splash the cash. We're going to be, jumping up a notch. And clearly it hasn't happened. So obviously that does lead
what he's been saying
upset
recently.
Yeah, he's changed his tone.
Which is the point that Kaiser makes here. I think the vibe of the support is in direct correlation to the comments of Brendan and his remarks of making a mark in Europe, as opposed to the usual mark that would be a skid mark. So it's just, I'll consider that for a while. But yeah, the fact that he, his sound bites do, you can see, if you want to, a huge swing between what he said back then and some of the utterances he's made recently, like, it's up to me to manage whoever comes in the door. I mean, when he says things like that, people lose their head and they think, oh, we've seen this movie before. He's already firing shots across the bows of the board. Has there been a fallout already? Are we just going to relive the same experience as last time? Nobody wants that. So
yeah, that's true.
Let's hear what
I was going to say.
Okay.
So I was going to say that the only other thing about that is he clearly said when he arrived that he appreciated that the club's signing policy and scouting policy had moved on. It was in a much better state, and that modern clubs worked like this. They worked with a group that go out and scout players, and the manager sort of indicates which kind of players they want, and they go and scout it, and then he'll get final say so on, does he want that player or not? But I think people are losing their head that going, oh, he's not even getting any. He's not getting to decide any of his signings. And I think that's maybe because obviously Ange knew those markets and then sort of linked in with Mark Law and his scouting network, and it sort of dovetailed. Whereas the fan base doesn't see that natural correlation anymore, and due to the history and maybe the slowness or less pleasing quality that's come in straight away, I think there is, a bit of angst about what might end up being the case. I think you can't judge the window until it's done, right?
Okay, but what I'm asking is, between now and the end of the window, are we not expecting to see a few Brendan Rodgers signings? Or is that the whole idea? David, do you think we're going to see 2 or 3 names that have more of a Rodgers stamp on them than Celtic FC pipeline?
So I think we will see signings. How many? I don't know. But if we had 2 quality players come in that week, that's good. That can make a significant difference. I think Brendan Rodgers' timing of his comments, etc., and the way in which he's phrasing off those, he's a bit off and probably sets everybody running. But you'd have to attach to that a number of conspiracies, right? That he was sold a pup by Desmond, that Peter Lawwell has, come back and masterminded his control of through his son Mark, and Brendan's agents and lawyers hadn't figured out his contract before he came in, so that he had the control that he specifically needed because he left the last time, because he didn't and wanted more money in profile. So there's just too many things you'd have to layer up here that we may read too much into. I'm not suggesting that there aren't things that we need to read and hear about, because we've seen patterns of things happen. When we were coming up to losing 10 in a row, when before Lennon left, there was lots of things that are visible to us on the park. But these other non-football playing related things, I just don't know, unless you're very close to it all. And I don't know anybody who is. Unless you're very close to it all, I don't know that we can see what's actually happening. Nicholson might be just a very quiet guy, seems to be, never comes out, says anything. He doesn't, maybe that's part of the learned behaviour. So he doesn't want to come out public. They just work away in the background. Yes, there seems to be a different tempo to the way in which we are signing and moving compared to how things were done with Ange. But that could be circumstantial, and we just don't know. So my expectation is that we will see players come in. I hope it's new players. I don't want to go backwards, but I'll take, if it's necessary to get ourselves sorted, we'll take other, players who have been before, fine. But I'd rather see new signings, and I expect to see so.
Players that have been here before. I wonder, Robert, does that make you excited about the idea of getting Jota and Hatate to hook up again?
Well, I don't know about that specifically, but we seem very ill-equipped for a Champions League group phase. I thought last year was quite a harsh learning curve for the players. We did play in an attacking style in all 6 games. Didn't win any of them. I thought we lacked a bit of pragmatism. And if you look at the seasons when we did well in the Champions League, or we were at least winning fixtures under O'Neill and Strachan and Lennon, we always had a bit of physicality in the team. We had some big players, bruisers that could really tackle, but they could play as well. And I think we've lacked that in the last couple of years since Brown left. And initially, Ange's signings, his success rate in signings, the first couple of windows was amazing. I mean, there was hardly a dud amongst all of them, and that's pretty unusual when you're signing so many players. But if you look at the this window and the last window in January, we've signed quite a lot of players, and I think the only one that you could say is really an outstanding success would be Alistair Johnston, who has played really well. 1 or 2 maybe look like they've got potential, but
Breaking up on us, Robert.
we're first team ready. Whether they're first team ready or even ready for the Champions League. So I think there's too many project players. You hear references all the time to the model. The model seemingly is that you sign somebody for 2 to 3 million and then you sell them for 15 to 20. And we've had a couple of good examples of that over the year with Musa, and now spectacularly so with Jota, the profit margin there. But I think, if you've got too many players, we might have 6 or 7 just now who have been bought on that basis of the model, that I don't see how you manage to play them all at the same time, and therefore you can't monetize, you can't make these great profits if people are not getting enough game time. And I think thus far Rodgers hasn't chosen to utilise a lot of the players that have been signed this year. And, some of them are coming off the bench. I quite like the look of the Korean winger. But, we've only seen a couple of cameos of him. And, I really couldn't comment on any of the others, the centre-backs, the Norwegian midfield player, all the Japanese and Korean. So that spell of spectacular success on the signing front, where guys went straight into the team, the Japanese players, and were successful. I think I'm not saying the wheels have come off, but I think the model looks less likely to succeed just now, because there's too many of them.
Yeah, well, let's have a look at a few comments here on the signing issue. Frank says, Brent's a very clever guy and knew exactly what he was saying when he said he works with what he's provided with. And what part of provided with says he has any kind of final say in this regard. Mickey Moynihan, it's hard to gauge what exactly a Brendan Rodgers signing would actually be after those comments. Did it not sound like he's simply in charge of making do with the players allocated? Similar point. And then Kaiser, who's making more of a contribution up to this show than the ones where he's scheduled to appear, says it was the 30 million war chest, then the 25 million from Jota. That's 55 million in some supporters' minds to improve the squad and make that jump in Europe. In reality, that's not the case. So I think we're all largely singing the same tune, is we're to some degree keeping the faith. You can make no declarations about what this window has been like until it has slammed shut, as transfer windows seem to do. So we'll see what happens, and then we have to give them time to gel and for Brendan to get his playing methods across.
Gav, sorry to interrupt. Just like my last point on this is, it's interesting that everybody seems to clamour for a Rodgers signing when, if you rewind back to when he was last year, that was one of the biggest grumbles about him, that he was great at developing the players we had, but some of the signings he made were pretty bloody poor, to be honest. So it's funny how the narrative changes when, people aren't getting what they expect and want, because like he made some of the players that were pretty average and expected to be out the door much better by good coaching. And then some of the players he signed were deemed to be a bit of a dud. So
Well, I wonder is that because of Ange had success when the players that were definitely Ange players, as Robert mentioned there, and the 3 that came in at the same time, was it 3? And adding to Kyogo were such a great success. So maybe that's part of it. Maybe that's why people want to see the managers, players coming in.
But I think if you look back to Rodgers 1, his initial signings were Musa, Scott Sinclair, who were outstanding successes, and then then we were on to Kolo Toure, who didn't last long, and Doris de Vries, and then he came up with Edouard and Incham, who were good signings, but it was a bit patchy, because then he went, I think it was Scott Bain, Jack Henry, Charlie Masonda, all in the one January window, none of whom were successful. So I think it's a sort of speculative business, recruitment, and the question I would want to ask the Celtic board is, for every 10 players that we sign, if 6 of them make a significant contribution to the first team and win trophies and win games for us, does that constitute success? So what sort of failure rate is tolerated? Because we've signed some real donkeys in the last 10 years. And I always go back. Mo Bangura, the striker we signed, I think on Henrik's recommendation, was got to be one of the worst players we've seen in a Celtic jersey. And that was 2 million plus wages, right? So I think as a business model, I think you'd be probably pretty lucky if you get 50% right. And that's why Ange's initial success was extraordinary, because probably 9 of the first 10 players he signed made very significant contribution to our success.
Well, speaking of significant contributions, let's move the conversation on so we get through our main points. The next one is we're previewing the Saints in Paradise. So we all said last time around, this Kilmarnock game is going to be a bit tricky, but we've definitely got enough to get past them. And that latter part of that sentence is, I imagine, what we're all thinking about this game coming up. But could the chaos continue, if indeed that's how you see it? What if we don't get a result against St Johnstone? Paul?
I don't think we can really comprehend. It just doesn't. I know it's one of the comments which I'm sure you'll bring up. I just don't think it's something we can comprehend, that we even let it into the mind that it could happen. Because to David's earlier point, and he sort of sneaked into this, is Celtic Park, regardless of who's available, full crowd behind, and a team languishing at the bottom of the league already this early, and having a pretty poor start in the League Cup qualifying play. Like that, it's. I said it to somebody else. This is like the perfect fixture on the back of what happened at the weekend. If we can't get a result in this one, we are the worm will turn even further. So yeah, I think it's regardless of who's available, we've got to come out of the blocks fast, try and get an early goal, and then build on it from there. I'd take any kind of win based on the back of last week, but yeah, to Frank's point, if a convincing win would go some way to settling the ship down. Hopefully, big win, comfortable win, half decent performance, and then a few signings next week, and then we can hopefully can go to Ibrox with a little bit of confidence. Because let's be honest, they're not great either. So I think we're catastrophizing to some degree, and what a decent result and a couple other extra players in the door that walk into the first team, and suddenly next week doesn't look too bad after that.
Well, that's the glass half full way of looking at it. What if we're absolutely rubbish at St Johnstone and we get a VAR decision against us, and Rangers, who looked like they're beginning to show some signs of gelling, they were good in patches in Europe in the other game. I'm not looking forward to Ibrox at all, and I couldn't wait for it before the season started. I was thinking their season's going to be over before it's even begun. The foot is going to be firmly on the throat, and I definitely don't think that at this stage of the game.
I think.
David? Sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think that part of the problem with Ibrox, apart from our defensive woes, are that they will have played 8 fixtures. They will have had 4 highly competitive fixtures in Europe, which we haven't had. So they're a bit further ahead of us, I think, in terms of mark sharpness, and a bit more up to speed. But I think a lot at Ibrox will just depend on what our back four looks like on the day. And I mean, Rodgers' record at Ibrox was exceptional first time round, but maybe that was weaker Rangers team. I think for the St Johnstone game, I think it'll be interesting to see what sort of tactics they employ, whether they just park the bus or whether they do what Ross County did a couple of weeks ago, and they came at us and man marked us. And I thought Ross County were excellent the way they attacked and created chances against us. Aberdeen created a lot of chances against us, and even though Kilmarnock, I think, had something like 27% possession, they had the same number of shots in the match as we did, and same number of shots, I think, on target. So I think teams are maybe playing a little bit differently against us compared with last season. You've got to remember that we didn't really finish last season that well. Last 6 league games plus the cup final. I'm not going to use that word, Gavin, but it was a sort of lower key performances and a bit subdued. I think that's unconvincing. So I expect us to win, and I think if we score early on Saturday against St Johnstone, it might be a big win, and that would be great for morale. But even if it's a 2-0, and it's a bit of a struggle, a win is a win. And I think in the SPL these days, the 5 substitute rule favours Celtic and Rangers so much against every other team that if we are in trouble with 20 minutes to go, frequently under Ange, we're bringing on 3 or 4 international players and winning a lot of games late on. And so we just can't afford to drop points against teams in the league. And that was Rangers' undoing last season, that they had a couple of stupid defeats when they were going through their European depression, and it affected them in the league as well. And something we need to be wary of once we start playing our Champions League games is that we continue to do the business at the weekend in the SPL.
Are we going to do the business, David, this weekend?
I believe that we will. But I think one of the things that we're reminded about, and I think it's come, one of the if we try and look at what's happened to us recently and take any benefit from it, is you want this little shock in the system now. McGregor has touched on it. He has said that we've got no God-given right to come in and think that we're going to win. There was a post during the week that someone reminded of the Jock scene saying that, and how he pushed that into the mindset of the team, that you have absolutely no right to think that you're going to go in. And I think all of these shocks to the systems and the comments from the guys watching about, Rodgers, let's get all of this out of the way now. Rodgers, if you've made a point to the board, you've made it now. Your job is to get that team winning, and you can't keep crying over there. If you've got problems, go get them sorted out. There's enough depth in our squad to be able to do it. We've played them 55 times since 2007, and we've won 44 of them. And that, I think, is because of the size of the team that we are in comparison to them. But no given right to go in. We've had our scare. I want to see a different attitude from the players. I want the manager to impose that on the team, and I want to see some slick play. And even if we don't have all of our injuries back, which doesn't look likely, we have enough professional footballers in the team to go and get this result at home. And we better get it, right? We need to be able to have confidence that that's who we are. So, yes, let's get that result.
That's a good note to leave it on, I think, as we move on to our final section, because the hour is fast approaching and we don't want to be here for too long. Of all those thousands of viewers, of course, Robert, over 700 strong on the live stream. And so let's talk about Celtic socials. Every week I ask you to give me a little nod to something that you've seen. So let's have a look at this. And who's going to talk us through this? I think this is you, Paul.
This is mine, right? So it's not Celtic related, but I thought it's, my sort of MO in these by now, it's to try and find something a bit heartwarming and a bit upbeat, particularly on the back of last week. So I don't know if you want to just play the clip and then I'll talk about what happened after it.
Well, it's 1 minute long. I'll just play it with the sound off and you can talk us through it.
Yeah, okay. So this kid is a guy called Nathan West. He's known as Westy. He was asked to do this interview with the club. I think it was the club channel. He was obviously quite excited and keen, and they asked him a few questions. Anyway, he answered all the questions, and then he said he was also, I think it was the same day as the Lionesses game, maybe the cup final or maybe the World Cup final or the semi. Anyway, he said he was going to watch the first half in the pub behind, and then he was going to listen to the second half while he was watching the game. Between that and, presumably his personal appearance, the trolls went crazy. He got absolutely pillared. He was taking an absolute pound in his, full-on pile-on, as often happens on Twitter. But the really cool thing that happened is these guys, the Pincon and 2 or 3 other people with massive followings across various football clubs and just Twitter in general, did a bit of digging and found out he was doing, I think it's a half marathon, and he's raising funds for Macmillan cancer nurses in the UK. He had a little target of £500, and as it stands tonight, it's over 50 grand. And wow. People and basically it's just a beautiful story where the trolls came in and hammered him, and then a few people fought back and went, "Nah, we're not having this. That's bang out of order. This is just a kid that's keen on his club and keen on football, and he's gone on telly, and he's been mocked." And so people have just, and it's all like £5, £10, mostly little ones, but there's just hundreds of people getting involved. And I just thought it was a great sort of turnaround on both the worst bits of social media and the best bits of social media. So fair play to Westy. I don't think it sort of shows any sign of slowing down. So I fully expect that total to continue to go up.
Yeah, it's a nice story in the end. Although it was pretty horrible that he was getting piled on. Clearly he's a guy with learning difficulties of some description. Mm-hmm. And it reminds me, in fact, of this other argument I had once with people on Twitter where, I don't know if you've seen these guys, Football Sheds, but people were piling in on them and giving them all the abuse. They're Rangers fans, and some of the language used to abuse them. We throw these terms around against rival fans. You're a moron and idiot, all this. And I honestly was saying, look, I don't think it's fair to take the mickey out of these guys either. There's a line that you shouldn't cross when you're abusing someone. If it's someone you think is a regular chap who's got a take that you think is ludicrous, then go in with both feet, sure. But there's got to be, some restraint if you think you might be dealing with people who, are with learning difficulties. Are you familiar with those guys? I'm not out of order to suggest that that's the case. Those guys,
no, I know the guys that you mean, and I agree with you. It's harmless people getting not what they deserve at all. Yeah. And it's obvious, and I think people just aren't grown-ups on social media, unfortunately.
Sure. Here's yours then, David. Talk us through this.
Well, this was just funny, just because it sort of started with against the grain of all of the flow of all of the comments, but then turns on its head, and it was kind of very comedically well done. Celtic played well today. They just need to work. Can you read that? I'll read it out. Celtic played well today. They just need to work on their ball retention, passing accuracy, keeping the ball in the deck and playing football, overlapping runs, playing it out from the back, not wasting opportunities, possession football, increasing the tempo, playing more one-touch football, getting shots on target and creating chances, and not wasting opportunity from set pieces. Yeah. I thought that was really well done based on where everybody was. So this guy, Aidan, I don't know much of him, but I see his comments coming out. But I thought this was very well articulated with humour, which wasn't very much in evidence from Sunday onwards. So,
no. Here's an interesting one I saw from Celtic Bars, new bar edition. Lihir Sports and Social Club in New Ireland Province, Papua New Guinea, is the new home of Papua New Guinea Celtic Supporters Club.
Wow,
which
fantastic!
Is extraordinary. Yeah,
I used to live in Papua New Guinea for 6 months in the mid '80s. Yeah, so there was certainly no Celtic Supporters Club then.
And the funny thing is, if you look at it on Google Earth, it's in Londolovit, which is a little place off a little place, which is off a slightly bigger place. It's not even the middle of Papua New Guinea. It's remote even for Papua New Guinea. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how many Celtic fans there are there coming in off the mining works.
I enjoyed the real jungle. Was it the real jungle boys?
Yeah.
Is that what
That's a good one. It makes me feel bad that I haven't set up one in Borneo.
You could
Which, in
be the
fact,
second real Jungle Boys.
the most remote CSC in the world. It's going to be hard to beat that one. And we'll close the show out as we just tick over the hour mark with last week's favourite, AJ Celtic. We rejoiced in his series of pictures last week of people with beards and long hair. This year it's bald with moustaches, which for one I think is a better look. But, I would say that. Brendan Rodgers.
Who was the guy Bronson? Who was the guy who was the hardest criminal or the most dangerous
Yeah.
criminal?
Charles
That's
Bronson,
who.
yeah.
Charles Bronson. That's who.
The thing that strikes
Well,
me
that's
about
amazing.
this picture with the hair removed is the distance from the top of his head to his shoulders is extraordinary. You know, I know they call him like swan neck and stuff, but if you sort of look at that blurred out, it looks like someone giving the middle finger. You know, that shape. It's pretty mad. Let's see who else we've got. Not too
Craig
bad.
Taylor.
What is going on there? What?
Is that Lagerbilk? Is
The
it?
Lagerbilka, yeah.
He doesn't exactly look terribly hard, does he? He's kind of making little fists there, but you'd fancy yourself against him if he came at you like that in an alleyway. That's pretty good.
Who
He
is
suits
it?
both the looks.
AJ.
That's Alistair Johnston, I think, was it?
Yeah,
That's
that
what
was
Johnson,
Johnson. Yeah, and then Callum.
There's the skipper.
Callum McGregor.
And then it all becomes a bit suspect.
This
some of these
is
moustaches.
Rayo. This is Rayo. The Dyson's brilliant.
Matt O'Reilly's still looking good.
He can
the
still
merciless.
It still looks good.
Hard to tell who that is.
It's brilliant.
That's ridiculous.
Kyogo.
Yeah.
What does he look like? I don't know.
Is that a banner? Who is that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a bad.
Badam. God.
Wow.
That's not a good look. And what's going on there? Absolutely ludicrous, but fantastic work again from AJ Celtic. Gotta say, he puts in a lot of effort,
Thank you.
doesn't he?
Well done.
All right, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure serving with you this evening. David, thank you, and KL. Robert, who's representing the SingTims with distinction in Glasgow, and Paul in Perth. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thanks, Gav.
Thank you.
Yes.
And
Glad
we
to
look
be
forward
involved.
to, well, it was great to have you involved, and we may indeed have other SingTims on future shows, because after all, we're all part of a Celtic world.